Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
The heat in Cairo that day was relentless, the kind of heat that seemed to stick to your skin no matter how much water you drank. My team and I, 10 strong, were on a routine patrol near the secured zone. The city was a patchwork of bombed-out buildings, rubble-strewn streets, and the occasional glimpse of life, a child peeking from behind a curtain, an old man sweeping his stoop. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the calm before the storm. "Keep your heads on a swivel," I said, scanning the buildings with my rifle at the ready. "Intel says this sector's been hot the past few days. Hotter than this damn sun." Private Simmons joked nervously, earning a chuckle from a few of the guys. "Stay sharp, Simmons," Corporal Ramirez said, his tone serious. "You laugh now, but these streets eat rookies for breakfast." It happened so fast. 1 second we were moving in formation, eyes darting from windows to alleys, and the next, a single shot rang out, shattering the tense silence. Private Lopez dropped to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Before anyone could react, I shouted, "Sniper!" and instinctively dove behind a burnt-out car. "Take cover. Find that shooter." Bullets began to rain down, ricocheting off the concrete and tearing through the air. My men scrambled for cover, shouting over the chaos. Where is he?" Ramirez yelled, his voice rising in panic. "Top floor, 3 o'clock, Specialist Walker shouted, pointing to a partially collapsed building. "Walker, take him out," I ordered, laying down suppressing fire. Walker fired a burst toward the sniper's perch, but the enemy was smart, using the shadows and rubble for cover. Before we could reposition, the situation went from bad to worse. The first rocket-propelled grenade struck with a deafening boom, blasting apart a wall to our left and sending chunks of concrete flying. "RPG!" Someone screamed, though it was obvious to everyone. "Get down!" I roared, dragging Simmons behind a pile of debris as another RPG slammed into a nearby car, turning it into a fireball. The heat singed my face, and the shockwave rattled my teeth. "Sergeant, they're flanking us," Ramirez called out, his voice barely audible over the gunfire and explosions. I peeked around the corner and saw them. Dozens of militants pouring out of alleys and doorways, rifles blazing. They were closing in, using the chaos to their advantage. "We're pinned down," Simmons shouted, his face pale with fear. "No, we're not," I growled. "We're soldiers. Damn it, hold the line." We fired back with everything we had, but they just kept coming. For every militant we dropped, it seemed like 3 more took their place. The RPG fire was relentless, each explosion a hammer blow against our resolve. When the militants got too close for comfort, I knew we had to act. "Ramirez, cover me," I shouted over the din, slinging my rifle over my shoulder and drawing my knife. "Sarge, are you crazy?" Ramirez yelled, firing wildly at the advancing enemy. "Just keep them off me." I charged into the fray, adrenaline pumping like a firestorm through my veins. The first militant I encountered swung his rifle at me like a club, but I ducked under it and drove my knife into his ribs. He gurgled, collapsing in a heap as I yanked the blade free. Another came at me with a machete, screaming in Arabic. I sidestepped his swing and slammed the butt of my stolen rifle into his face, shattering his nose. Before he could recover, I brought my knife across his throat in a swift, brutal arc. The fighting became a blur. I found myself in an alley, surrounded by 3 militants. One lunged at me with a crowbar, but I parried his strike with my rifle and drove my knife into his chest. Another tried to flank me, but I spun around and shot him point-blank with my pistol. The third hesitated, his rifle trembling in his hands. "Don't do it," I warned him, my voice low and dangerous. He ignored me, raising his weapon. I didn't hesitate. 1 shot to the head and he was down. Back on the main street, my team was holding their ground. Ramirez and Walker had managed to take out the sniper, and the rest of the squad was mowing down the enemy with precision. The militants, realizing they couldn't overwhelm us, began to retreat, dragging their wounded and leaving their dead. "That's right, run," Ramirez shouted, firing a few parting shots. I staggered back to my team, my body screaming in pain. That's when I realized I'd been hit twice. 1 round had torn through my side, another through my thigh, and a graze had opened up my left arm. "Sergeant, you're bleeding," Simmons exclaimed, his face pale. "I'm fine," I lied, gritting my teeth. "Just a scratch." By the time reinforcements arrived, the street was a war zone. The ground was littered with bodies, 45 enemy combatants, all dead. We'd held the line, but the cost was high. 4 of my men were gone. Their lifeless bodies a sobering reminder of the price we'd paid. I collapsed onto the ground, the adrenaline fading. Ramirez knelt beside me, pressing his hands to my side to stem the bleeding. "You did good, Sarge," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We all did," I replied, my vision blurring. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later, barely alive. The doctors told me I'd lost a kidney and most of my liver. My career in the military was over, but I was alive. For our actions that day, I was awarded the Silver Star, but no medal could erase the guilt of losing my men. Their faces haunt me to this day, a constant reminder of the cost of war. When I came back home, I thought I was ready to start over. The world felt different, though quieter, slower. The chaos of Cairo had faded into the rearview mirror, but its shadows still lingered in my mind. Home was supposed to be my refuge, the place where I could finally breathe. And in many ways, it was. Rachel greeted me at the airport with a smile that could light up the darkest night. She looked as beautiful as the day I married her. 8 years together, and she still made my heart skip a beat. "I've missed you," she whispered as we embraced. "I missed you more," I replied, holding her close, feeling her warmth for the first time in months. She kissed me, tears in her eyes. "You're finally home. No more deployments. No more worrying every night." "No more worrying," I promised her. Settling back into civilian life wasn't easy, but I landed a job as the head of security at a local firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. The routine gave me something to focus on, something to keep me grounded. Rachel was doing well in her career too. She worked as a marketing consultant at an advertising firm, always coming up with ideas that left her clients impressed. I was proud of her, but her job kept her busy, sometimes too busy. One evening after dinner, I decided it was time to have the conversation I'd been putting off since I got back. "Rachel," I started, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. She was scrolling through emails on her phone but looked up when she heard my tone. "Yeah, I've been thinking," I said, carefully choosing my words. "I'm not going overseas anymore. I'm here now for good. Maybe it's time we think about starting a family." She set her phone down, her expression unreadable. "A family?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding. "We've been married 8 years. I know things have been hectic, but I think we're ready." "I'm ready." Rachel leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I don't know, Nathan. I mean, it's a big decision." "I know," I said gently. "I'm not saying it has to happen tomorrow. I want us to think about it. We're not getting any younger, and I want to be the kind of dad who can run around with his kids without wheezing like an old man." That got a small smile out of her, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll think about it," she said finally, standing up and picking up her plate. "But can we not rush into this?" "Of course," I replied, watching her retreat to the sink. First, I thought everything was fine. Rachel seemed normal, busy with work as always, but normal. We still had our nightly dinners, still laughed over old inside jokes, still shared the same bed. But over the weeks that followed, something shifted. She started coming home later than usual, saying she had to stay late for meetings or meet with clients. She'd sit on the couch, lost in her phone or laptop, even when we were supposed to be spending time together. Our conversations became shorter, more surface level. "Rachel," I said one evening as she sat at the dining table, typing furiously on her laptop. "Do you want to watch that movie we talked about? You know, the one with that spy you like?" She didn't even look up. "I can't tonight, Nathan. I have a deadline tomorrow." "You've been working late a lot," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Is everything okay at work?" "Yeah, everything's fine," she replied quickly. Almost too quickly. "Just busy, that's all." I nodded, though her words didn't sit right with me. "All right, let me know if you need anything." "Thanks," she said, finally glancing up to give me a tired smile. But that smile felt distant, like it wasn't really meant for me. Rachel was pulling away, and I could feel it. I didn't know why, but the warmth that used to fill our home was slowly being replaced by something colder. I told myself not to overthink it, that maybe it was just a rough patch. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was late again. Rachel came through the door just past 11. her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, though I hadn't turned a page in nearly 20 minutes. "Hey," I said, my voice even. "Hey," she replied, setting her purse down on the kitchen counter. "You're late again," I said, closing the book and placing it on the coffee table. Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "I told you, Nathan. There's a lot going on at work right now." "Work, huh?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "And the weekly girls' nights? Those part of the work schedule too." She turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, standing up, "you're putting a hell of a lot more effort into everything else than into us." Rachel threw her hands in the air. "Oh, here we go again. Do you know how exhausting it is to come home after a long day and get interrogated like this?" "Exhausting?" I shot back. "You're not the only one who's tired, Rachel. You think it's easy for me, sitting here every night, wondering what's happened to us? Wondering why you don't even look at me the same way anymore?" Her expression softened for a brief moment, but then it hardened again. "Nathan, you're overthinking everything. I'm just busy. That's all it is." I stared at her, searching for something in her face that would reassure me, but all I saw was a wall I couldn't break through. "Is there something else, Rachel? Something you're not telling me?" "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice defensive. "You know damn well what I'm talking about," I said, taking a step closer. "If you're having an affair, just tell me now. Don't make me find out some other way." Her face twisted in anger. "How dare you?" she snapped. "How dare you accuse me of something like that? I'm your wife, Nathan. I've been loyal to you every single day of our marriage. And this is how you repay me? Then tell me what's going on." I yelled, my own anger bubbling over. "Tell me why you're so distant. Why you're shutting me out. If it's not an affair, then what the hell is it?" Rachel stood there, breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Finally, she shook her head, her voice quieter now but no less angry. "There's nothing going on, Nathan. Nothing. You want to know what's bothering me? It's this constant questioning, this distrust. You're suffocating me." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. She didn't wait for me to say anything. She turned on her heel and stormed off to the bedroom. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the shattered silence between us. My heart was pounding, and my mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't organize. Finally, I followed her to the bedroom. She was already in bed, her back turned to me. I didn't say a word as I got in beside her. We lay there in silence, the tension so thick it felt like a physical presence in the room. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us reached out. We were inches apart, but it felt like miles. Days turned into weeks, but the silence between Rachel and me remained a permanent fixture. We passed each other like strangers, offering nothing more than hollow greetings or curt responses. It wasn't the marriage we once had. It wasn't a marriage at all anymore. When Rachel started going out twice a week instead of once, I couldn't keep quiet. She came home late again, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers and wine that she didn't drink with me. She walked through the door, heels clicking against the floor as I sat in the kitchen, nursing a glass of water. "Another late one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze for a second before setting her purse down on the counter. "Yes, Nathan. Another late one. We've been over this. It's just the girls' night out." "Twice a week now?" I stood up, walking toward her. "That's a lot of catching up with the girls, Rachel." She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "What's your point, Nathan?" "My point," I said, my voice rising, "is that this is getting out of hand. You're out more nights than you're home. This isn't normal, Rachel, and you know it." "I'm not an idiot." "Oh, here we go again," she said with a bitter laugh. "You're accusing me of something, aren't you? What is it this time? An affair? Lying? What?" I took a step closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "I'm saying that if you don't put a stop to this, there are going to be consequences. Severe consequences." Her eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, I thought she might throw something again. Instead, she stepped forward, getting right in my face. "You want to talk about consequences, Nathan? How about this? I'll file for divorce. Better yet, I'll tell the police you're abusive. Let's see how far your rules get you then." Her words hit me like a gut punch. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, the heat of my anger threatening to boil over. But I bit down on it, clenching my jaw so tight it hurt. I took a slow breath and looked her dead in the eye. "You need to watch your mouth, Rachel," I said, my voice low and steady. "I live by rules, respect for others and respect for myself. And I expect the same in return. You don't want to push me on this." She didn't reply, just glared at me for a moment before grabbing her purse and heading to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, the tension simmering in my chest. I wasn't going to let her tear me down or destroy what little was left of our marriage without a fight. But I needed answers. Real answers. That night, as I sat in the living room nursing a glass of whiskey, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait any longer. If Rachel wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it out myself. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a familiar name. Jake. Jake was an old friend, someone I'd served with back in the military. He'd become a private investigator after leaving the service, and if there was anyone I could trust to get to the bottom of this, it was him. I hit call, and after a few rings, his gruff voice came through the line. "Nate, long time no talk. What's going on?" "Jake," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I need a favor. Anything for you, brother." "What's up?" "It's Rachel," I said, exhaling deeply. "Something's not right. She's been acting distant. Late nights, excuses, pulling away. I need you to keep an eye on her for me." Discreetly. There was a pause on the other end before Jake replied. "You sure about this, Nate? Once I start digging, you might not like what I find." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Just do it, Jake. Let me know what you find." "All right," he said with a sigh. "I'll get started first thing tomorrow." "Thanks," I said before hanging up. For the next 3 days, I tried to act normal. I went to work, came home, and played the part of the patient, understanding husband. But inside, I was a storm of emotions. Anxious, angry, and bracing for the worst. Then Jake called. I was at my desk, finishing up some paperwork, when his name flashed on my phone. My heart sank as I answered. "Jake." "Nate," he said, his tone cautious. "I've got some news. You sitting down?" I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Just tell me." "She's been hitting up the bars and clubs, just like you thought," he began. "Dancing with guys, letting them get a little too close. It's nothing explicit yet, but it's not innocent either." My pulse quickened. "Anything else?" Jake hesitated. "There's one guy. His name's Matt. Works with her at her firm. Married, 2 kids. They've been spotted together a few times after work. Drinks, dinners, nothing outright yet, but it's heading somewhere." My jaw tightened as I stopped pacing. "And Rachel? How's she acting around him?" "She's not shutting him down," Jake admitted. "If anything, she's encouraging it. They were in a parking lot last night. Lots of touching, some heavy petting. No sex as far as I can tell, but it's only a matter of time." I clenched my teeth, the anger boiling just beneath the surface. "Keep following her," I said through gritted teeth. "If she crosses the line, I need to know immediately." "You got it," Jake said. "And Nate, I'm sorry, man." I hung up without replying, my hands trembling as I set the phone down. My worst fears were coming true, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold myself together. 2 nights later, the confirmation came. Jake called again, his voice grim. "Nate, it's official. Rachel crossed the line." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She and Matt were in his car tonight," Jake said. "I've got photos and video. It's undeniable." My stomach churned as he spoke, but I kept my voice steady. "Send me everything." Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a series of messages. I opened the first one, my eyes scanning the images of Rachel and Matt tangled together in his car. The final nail in the coffin. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the betrayal cutting deeper than I'd ever thought possible. When the rage finally bubbled to the surface, I grabbed my phone and called Kelly, the divorce lawyer Jake had recommended. "Kelly," I said when she answered. "It's Nathan. I need to start the process." "Understood," she replied. "Do you want to meet in person, or should we handle it over the phone?" "Just handle it," I said bluntly. "I'll send you everything you need." She hesitated. "Nathan, are you sure about this? It's a big step." "She cheated on me," I said flatly. "There's nothing left to save." "All right," Kelly said gently. I'll get started. The next morning, Rachel came home after another late night, her hair disheveled and her makeup smudged. She didn't even bother to come up with an excuse this time, just walked past me toward the bedroom. Rachel, I said, my voice cold. She stopped, turning to face me. What? Sit down, I said, pointing to the dining table. She rolled her eyes but complied, slumping into a chair. I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward her. Look, she frowned, picking it up. Her face paled as she scrolled through the photos and video Jake had sent me. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide with panic. Nathan, Don't, I interrupted. Don't even try to explain. It's over, Rachel. I've already contacted a lawyer. You'll be served by the end of the day. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, she stood, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, standing as well. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. She didn't say another word, just grabbed her purse and walked out the door. As it slammed shut behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, but so was a sense of closure. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken back control of my life. After Rachel left, the house fell into an eerie silence. I sat at the dining table, staring at the empty chair she had just vacated. For the first time in months, I felt an odd sense of peace. The truth was out, and the decisions had been made. There was no turning back now. By the end of the day, Rachel was served with the divorce papers. Kelly worked quickly, ensuring every detail was airtight. The terms were straightforward: we would split nothing. Rachel kept her car and whatever savings she had in her account. I kept the house and my assets. No drawn-out battles, no negotiations. It was as clean a break as it could be. A week later, I got a call from Jake. Nate, you got a minute? Yeah, I said, leaning back in my chair. What's up? Well, I thought you should know something, he said, his tone cautious. Matt's wife found out. I straightened up. What do you mean? She hired her own PI, Jake explained. She's got her own set of evidence, pictures, videos, you name it. Word is, she's filing for divorce too. I let out a bitter laugh. Good. Sounds like karma's finally catching up to both of them. Jake chuckled softly. Yeah, it seems that way. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. It's over, Jake. And honestly, I'm glad. I don't have to keep wondering anymore. Now I can focus on moving forward. Good to hear, brother, Jake said. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Thanks, Jake, for everything. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life started to feel normal again. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the oppressive silence it had been when Rachel was still here. It was peaceful. I spent my mornings working out, my afternoons at the security firm, and my evenings reading or catching up with old friends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then one day, about a month after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Rachel's mother. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what she could possibly want. Nathan, she said, her voice shaky. It's Claire. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I blinked, caught off guard. Sorry? For what? For how things turned out, she said softly. Rachel made mistakes, and I can't excuse what she did. But I hope you know she's not a bad person. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. Claire, I appreciate you reaching out, but Rachel made her choices. She knew what she was doing, and she knew what it would cost her. I know, Claire said, her voice breaking slightly. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her someday. I was silent for a moment before replying. Forgiveness isn't the issue, Claire. It's trust. And that's gone. She sighed heavily. I understand. I won't bother you again. Take care, Claire, I said before hanging up. A few months later, I ran into Jake at a local diner. He slid into the booth across from me, a sly grin on his face. Guess who I ran into the other day? He said, sipping his coffee. Who? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Matt, Jake said, leaning back in his seat. He's not doing so hot. Lost his job, his wife's taking him for everything he's got, and his reputation's in the gutter. Guess Rachel wasn't worth it after all. Couldn't help but smirk. Karma's a hell of a thing, isn't it? Jake chuckled. Sure is. How about you? How's life treating you? Better, I said honestly. A lot better. It's not exciting, but it's steady. And for now, that's enough. Jake nodded, raising his coffee mug in a mock toast. Here's to starting over. To starting over, I echoed, clinking my water glass against his mug. As time went on, I found myself reflecting less on the past and more on the future. I wasn't sure what it held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I didn't know if I'd ever fall in love again, but I wasn't in a rush to find out. For now, I was content with the quiet, the simplicity, and the knowledge that I had done the right thing. Rachel's chapter in my life was over, and as I walked out of that diner, the sun shining on my face, I realized something: the story wasn't done yet. It was just beginning. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm. The echoes of my past were still there, but they were growing quieter, like the fading sound of distant gunfire. I had carved out a new sense of normalcy, filling my days with work, exercise, and the occasional coffee with friends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful, and for now that was enough. One evening, I was out for a run along the park trail when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I slowed to a walk, pulled it out, and saw a name I hadn't expected to see: Brenda. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since we'd both finalized our divorces and gone our separate ways. Curious, I answered. Brenda, I said, slightly out of breath. Long time. Hey, Nathan, she replied, her tone hesitant. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all, I said. What's going on? There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her gathering her thoughts. I just wanted to check in, she finally said. See how you're doing. I smiled, surprised by the gesture. I'm doing all right. Things have been quiet, but in a good way. How about you? I'm good, she said, though there was something in her voice that didn't quite match the words. I've been keeping busy. Started volunteering at a local shelter, trying to put some good back into the world. That's great, I said genuinely. Sounds like you're doing something meaningful. Yeah, she said softly. It helps. Keeps my mind off. Well, everything. We both fell silent for a moment, the weight of our shared experiences hanging in the air. Nathan, she said suddenly, her tone more serious. I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. Do you ever think about what's next? Like what comes after all this? After the anger, the hurt, the healing? Her question caught me off guard. I slowed to a stop, looking out at the darkening horizon. Honestly, I don't know. I've been so focused on getting through each day that I haven't thought much about what's next. Brenda sighed. Yeah, me too. But I guess I just wanted to say, if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who gets it, I'm here. I smiled, touched by her sincerity. Thanks, Brenda. That means a lot. Don't mention it, she said lightly, though her voice carried a warmth that lingered even after the call ended. The conversation with Brenda stayed with me over the next few weeks. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. We started talking more often, sharing stories and laughs, and slowly, a friendship began to form. One Saturday, she invited me to join her at the shelter where she volunteered. It was a small place, tucked away in a quiet part of town, and it was filled with people who had been through their own battles: homeless veterans, single parents, struggling families. Helping out there felt good, like I was finally putting my own pain to use for something bigger than myself. Brenda and I grew closer, but we kept things simple. There were no expectations, no pressure to define what we were. We were just two people who understood each other in a way few others could. Then, one day, as I was leaving the shelter, Brenda caught up to me in the parking lot. Nathan, she said, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Wait. I turned, surprised. What's up? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about not knowing what's next. And I realized, maybe we don't have to know. Maybe it's okay to just take it one step at a time. I nodded, her words resonating deeply. Yeah, one step at a time. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. Hope. Life wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like I was moving forward, not running away from the past, but towards something new. Maybe it was friendship, maybe it was more, or maybe it was just the simple act of rebuilding. Whatever it was, I was ready for it. Because sometimes, starting over isn't just about closing a chapter. It's about opening a new one, with all its uncertainties, possibilities, and promise. And as Brenda and I walked out into the crisp evening air, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. Over the following months, my life began to feel like a puzzle slowly coming together. Brenda and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. Not as a couple, but as close friends who shared a bond forged by betrayal and healing. We spent weekends volunteering at the shelter, sharing quiet dinners, and occasionally challenging each other to games of pool at the local bar. It was simple, but it was good. One afternoon, while sorting donations at the shelter, Brenda turned to me with a thoughtful look. "Nathan, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, folding a jacket and placing it in the proper bin. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Do you ever think about giving love another shot?" I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. It was a question I hadn't dared to ask myself, let alone answer. "Honestly," I said, "I don't know. The idea of letting someone get that close again. It's scary." Brenda nodded, her expression somber. "Yeah, I get that. After what Brian put me through, it's hard to imagine trusting someone like that again. But I also think about what it would be like to find someone who's different. Someone who's honest, kind, and willing to work through the hard stuff." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, I broke the silence. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "But I don't want to rush into anything. If it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, well, I'm okay with that too." Brenda smiled softly. "That's a good way to look at it." As time went on, I found myself thinking about Brenda more and more. It wasn't just her kindness or her strength that drew me in. It was the way she understood me without needing an explanation. She didn't push, didn't pry. She just let me be, and that was something I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, I decided to take a chance. "Brenda," I said, my voice steady but uncertain, "do you ever think about what it would be like if we tried this?" She turned to me, her eyes wide. "Tried what?" I gestured between us. "This. I know we've both been through a lot, and I'm not saying we should jump into anything, but maybe we could see where this goes, if you're open to it." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "I think I'd like that." Taking that step with Brenda wasn't easy. We both carried scars from our pasts, and there were moments when the weight of those memories threatened to pull us under. But we leaned on each other, learning to communicate openly and honestly. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but it was real, and that was what mattered. Our relationship grew slowly, rooted in friendship and mutual respect. We didn't rush things, letting each day unfold naturally. We celebrated small milestones, a hike to a scenic overlook, an impromptu road trip to a nearby city, even something as simple as cooking dinner together without setting off the smoke alarm. One day, while sitting at the shelter after hours, Brenda brought up something that had been on her mind. "Nathan," she began, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt, "have you ever thought about expanding this place?" I frowned, caught off guard. "Expanding? What do you mean?" "Well," she said, her eyes lighting up, "we've been getting more people in here lately, and it's clear the demand is growing. I was thinking, what if we started a fundraiser to renovate the building? Maybe add more beds, a bigger kitchen, even a playroom for the kids." I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. It was an ambitious idea, but it had merit. "That's actually a great idea. It won't be easy, but if anyone can pull it off, it's you." She grinned. "You really think so?" "I know so," I said, smiling back, "and I'll help in any way I can." The fundraiser became our shared project, a way to channel our energy into something positive. We organized events, reached out to local businesses for sponsorships, and spread the word through social media. It was hard work, but seeing the community come together to support the cause was incredibly rewarding. As the months went by, the shelter began to transform. Walls were repainted, new beds were installed, and the kitchen was outfitted with updated appliances. Brenda and I spent countless hours there, often staying late into the night to oversee the renovations. One evening, as we stood in the newly finished playroom, I turned to Brenda and said, "You did it." She laughed, wiping a smudge of paint from her cheek. "We did it." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "Brenda, thank you. For everything. For believing in this. For believing in us." She stepped closer, her expression soft. "Nathan, I couldn't have done this without you. You've been my rock through all of this." Without thinking, I reached out and took her hand. "And you've been mine." The fundraiser marked a turning point for both of us. It wasn't just about the shelter. It was about finding purpose, about healing, about building something meaningful together. As we stood in that newly renovated space, surrounded by the fruits of our labor, I realized something. This was what happiness felt like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Months after the grand opening of the newly expanded shelter, life felt different, brighter, fuller, and meaningful in ways I hadn't expected. Brenda and I had found a rhythm, balancing our personal lives with the growing responsibilities at the shelter. It wasn't just a place to help others anymore. It had become a symbol of our shared purpose and the life we were building together. One crisp fall morning, Brenda and I were setting up for a community event at the shelter, a fundraiser to help keep operations running smoothly. Volunteers bustled about, arranging tables, hanging decorations, and preparing food. The energy in the air was electric. As Brenda adjusted a banner that read, "Together, we build futures," I couldn't help but smile at her. She had a knack for bringing people together, and her passion for the shelter was contagious. "You know," I said, walking over to her, "you're pretty amazing." She turned, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Oh, stop," she said with a laugh, though her eyes sparkled with gratitude. "I couldn't do any of this without you." "That's not true," I said, crossing my arms. "You've been the heart of this place since day one." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening. "Maybe, but you've been the one keeping me grounded." Before I could respond, a volunteer interrupted us with a question about seating arrangements, and we were swept back into the chaos of preparation. But that moment stuck with me, a quiet reassurance that what we were building wasn't just about the shelter. It was about us, too. The fundraiser was a huge success. Families from the community turned out in droves, donating generously and sharing stories about how the shelter had touched their lives. Brenda and I spent the evening mingling, thanking donors, and soaking in the overwhelming support. As the event wound down and the crowd began to thin, I found Brenda standing on the shelter's front steps, looking out at the quiet street. I joined her, slipping my hands into my pockets. "Tired?" I asked. "A little," she admitted, "but it's a good kind of tired." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "Nathan, do you ever think about what's next?" "Sometimes," I said, glancing at her. "Why? Do you have something in mind?" She hesitated, then turned to face me. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how far we've come, not just with the shelter, but with everything. And I guess I'm wondering if it's time to take another step forward." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "What kind of step are we talking about?" Brenda smiled, a little shyly. "I don't know. Maybe it's time we think about building something more permanent. Together." The weight of her words hit me, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of weight that came with possibility, with hope. I reached out and took her hand, lacing my fingers with hers. "I think I'd like that," I said, my voice steady. "One step at a time, right?" She nodded, her smile growing. One step at a time. In the weeks that followed, Brenda and I began to talk more openly about the future. It wasn't just about us. It was about what we wanted to build together. We started small, taking time to ensure we were both on the same page. But with each conversation, the vision of our future became clearer. One evening, as we sat on the couch in her living room, I turned to her with an idea. What if we expanded the shelter into more than just a shelter? What if it became a resource center, too? Job training, counseling, childcare, the whole package. Brenda's eyes lit up, and she leaned forward. That's an incredible idea, but it would take a lot of work." "I know," I said, grinning, "but we've never been afraid of hard work, have we?" She laughed, shaking her head. "No, we haven't." "Okay, let's do it." The months that followed were some of the busiest and most fulfilling of our lives. We applied for grants, partnered with local businesses, and rallied the community to support the expansion. The process wasn't without its challenges, but every obstacle we faced only strengthened our resolve. By the following year, the shelter had transformed into a comprehensive resource center. Families who had once struggled to make ends meet now had access to job training programs, mental health services, and a safe place for their children to learn and play. The impact was tangible, and it fueled us to keep pushing forward. On a quiet evening after the grand opening of the resource center, Brenda and I stood in the lobby, looking around at what we had accomplished. The walls were lined with art created by children who had passed through the shelter, and the air was filled with a sense of hope. "We did it," Brenda said softly, leaning her head against my shoulder. "We did," I agreed, wrapping an arm around her. As we stood there, I realized something. This wasn't just a chapter in my life. This was the life I had been searching for, the one I never thought I'd find after everything I'd been through. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its struggles, but it was real, and it was ours. Brenda looked up at me, her eyes shining. "So, what's next?" I smiled, a sense of peace settling over me. "Whatever we want." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. Life took on a new rhythm as the resource center flourished. Brenda and I had created something far beyond what we initially imagined. The community had embraced it as a beacon of hope, and every time we walked through its doors, we were reminded of why we started this journey. But amidst the bustle of our shared mission, our personal lives began to evolve as well. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the center, Brenda and I found ourselves sitting on a park bench not far from her home. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, and the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd be here." "Where?" I asked, turning to look at her. She gestured vaguely around us. "Here. Happy. Fulfilled. With someone I trust." Her words hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten with emotion. "I know what you mean," I said quietly. "After everything that happened, I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again." Brenda smiled softly, reaching out to take my hand. "But we made it, didn't we?" I nodded, lacing my fingers with hers. "Yeah, we did." She tilted her head, studying me with that same thoughtful expression I'd come to know so well. "Nathan, can I ask you something?" "Anything." She hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Do you ever think about starting a family? I mean, with everything we've built here, it feels like we've already created a kind of family. But I guess I'm wondering if you've ever thought about something more personal." The question caught me off guard, but only for a moment. I had thought about it more than once, and as I looked at Brenda, I realized that the idea didn't scare me the way it once did. If anything, it felt right. "I do think about it," I admitted. "And if that's something you want, then yeah, I'd like to explore that." Her eyes lit up, and she squeezed my hand. "I'd like that too." The decision to start a family wasn't one we took lightly. We spent months talking, planning, and making sure we were ready for such a big step. The resource center was thriving, and we had built a solid foundation for ourselves. Felt like the right time to move forward. A year later, on a warm spring morning, we welcomed our daughter into the world. We named her Lily, after Brenda's late grandmother. Holding her for the first time was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose and love. Brenda looked at me from her hospital bed, exhausted but beaming. "She's perfect," she whispered. "She is." I agreed, my voice thick with emotion. Becoming parents added a new layer of complexity to our lives, but it also brought us closer together. Lily became a part of the resource center, her laughter echoing through the halls as she grew. The community adored her, and she was a constant reminder of why we did what we did. Balancing work and family wasn't always easy, but we found ways to make it work. We leaned on each other, on our friends, and on the community we had helped build. And through it all, we never lost sight of what mattered most: each other. One evening, years later, Brenda and I sat on the porch of our home, watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard. The resource center had become a cornerstone of the community, and our family had grown into something I never could have imagined during those dark days after Rachel. "You know," Brenda said, leaning her head against my shoulder, "if someone had told me back then that this is where we'd end up, I wouldn't have believed them. Me neither, I admitted, wrapping an arm around her. But I'm glad we took the chance. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. I am too. As we watched Lily laugh and run barefoot through the grass, I felt a deep sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was ours, messy, beautiful, and full of possibility. And as I held Brenda close, I realized that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most incredible destinations. We had faced heartbreak, loss, and uncertainty, but we had come out stronger on the other side. Together, we had built a life worth living. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Years passed, and life continued to evolve in ways I never could have predicted. The Resource Center flourished, becoming a pillar of support for the community. Brenda and I continued to grow as partners, not just in our work but in our lives together. Lily grew up surrounded by love, kindness, and the spirit of giving. She became a reflection of everything Brenda and I had fought so hard to build. A bright, hopeful reminder of what was possible even after the darkest of times. One sunny afternoon, as Brenda and I sat in the backyard of our home, watching Lily play with our dog, a wave of contentment washed over me. Brenda, now with faint streaks of silver in her hair, leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand resting in mine. The years had left their marks on both of us, but they were badges of a life well lived. Nathan, she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning, do you ever stop and think about how far we've come? All the time, I replied, squeezing her hand gently. Sometimes I still can't believe it. She smiled, her gaze fixed on Lily, who was chasing butterflies across the yard. We've been through so much, but somehow we made it. Together, I said, turning to look at her. That's what made the difference. Brenda looked up at me, her eyes glistening with emotion. I wouldn't change a thing, not a single moment. Neither would I. The pain, the struggles, the heartbreak. It had all led us here, to this moment, to this life. As the years turned into decades, Brenda and I continued to find joy in the little things: lazy Sunday mornings, family dinners, and quiet evenings on the porch. The Resource Center remained a big part of our lives, but we also made time for ourselves, traveling, exploring, and embracing the beauty of the world around us. When Lily eventually left for college, it was bittersweet. Watching her grow into a confident, compassionate young woman filled us with pride, but the house felt quieter without her. Still, Brenda and I found solace in each other, as we always had. One autumn evening, as we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the leaves fall from the trees, Brenda turned to me with a smile. Do you ever think about what kind of legacy we're leaving behind? All the time, I said, my voice steady. But I think the answer's right there. I gestured toward the Resource Center in the distance, its warm lights glowing softly against the evening sky. It was a beacon, not just for the community but for us. A reminder of what we had built together, what we had endured, and what we had overcome. Brenda rested her head on my shoulder. It's a good legacy, she said. One I'm proud of. Me too, I replied, wrapping my arm around her. More than I can put into words. When the end finally came, it wasn't with fanfare or drama. It was quiet, peaceful, and filled with the same love that had defined our lives together. Brenda passed away one spring morning, her hand in mine, surrounded by family and friends. Her loss left a void that could never truly be filled, but her presence remained in everything she had touched. In Lily, in the Resource Center, and in the countless lives she had changed. In the days that followed, I found solace in the memories we had made. Brenda had taught me the power of resilience, the importance of compassion, and the beauty of second chances. She had shown me that even in the face of heartbreak, it was possible to build something extraordinary. Years later, as I sat in the same backyard where we had watched Lily chase butterflies, now with grandchildren running around, I felt a deep sense of peace. Brenda's legacy lived on, not just in the work we had done but in the family we had built and the love we had shared. Life had come full circle, and though it hadn't been easy, it had been worth it. As I closed my eyes and listened to the laughter of my grandchildren echoing through the yard, I whispered a quiet thank you, to Brenda, to life, to everything that had brought me to this moment. And in that moment, I knew we had done more than survive. We had thrived, and that was the greatest legacy of all.